Hello? Yes. Yes, I know you're a massive Arsenal fan. No, I'm looking forward to the game tomorrow as well. Yeah. No, look, mate, you don't have to prove it. You've said plenty. You've said plenty. I know. Mikel Arteta is the best, obviously. I know that you wish you had Gyokeres as well, but you've got that other guy. Anyway, I've got a show to do. All right, see you later. Up the Arsenal, yeah? Bye-bye. Thomas Frank. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls. Another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. Really appreciate you listening and tuning in. If you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show, I would greatly appreciate it. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day, of course, and your week has been good. And I hope that you're going to be looking forward to the rest of this morning's episode. Good morning to you all joining us in the chat box. Really appreciate your time. Jumping in there, we've got Runs with Cows, we've got Logan, we've got Martin, we've got Mark, Maximius, Brian, Tom, we've got Claire, Pam, Graham, Jose. Good morning to you, to Steve. We've got Otti, we've got Steve, we've got Paul and other Steve in the chat box as well, Martin and Jamil. Holloway, we've got Paul, we've got Amberly and Arasilki, we've got Shortback, Matt, Colin, Mo, and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box as well. Please do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Thank you to everyone that tuned into yesterday's show and contributed to our conversation. There's a lot of people with a lot of different thoughts. I say a lot of different thoughts. It kind of did lean very heavily one way, and it was a really good discussion, I thought, actually, kind of talking about the shirts and the kits and if it's all right. We had a lot of views from people around the world, a couple of negative Nellies as usual, grumpy Paul in the comment section as usual, but it was a good conversation, a good chat, and thank you for getting involved. But of course, we've got brand new things to talk about this morning, and I hope that you'll get involved. And of course, we'll be answering more of your questions as well as usual in part two. So without further ado, I've not actually selected the slideshow this morning. Let's do that, and let's crack on, shall we? With today's stories, we begin with the news that Viktor Gyokeres and his number 14 shirt has broken the record for the number of sales of an Arsenal shirt of all time. I genuinely was taken a bit back by this story being reported by James McNicholas in The Athletic yesterday. I don't know about you, but I really am quite surprised by this. I was trying to put into my head the reason is this and who that means, of course, has been beaten. Of course, Aubameyang's 14 shirt. You think about Ozil, you think about Alexis, you think about Bukayo Saka and his shirts, but I don't know if it's like a single shirt or the all-time shirts as well that have been sold of a single player. But a new signing, unbelievable, really. I know the 14 is absolutely iconic with Arsenal. We have to be very well aware of that. And I know that Arsenal fans have waited a long, long time for a brand new striker. I don't think that, and I was leaning towards the Benjamin Šeško deal as well, but I don't think that Benjamin Šeško, had he have signed for Arsenal, I don't think he would have done this. And that's nothing to do with the player's quality. I think there's almost like a brand, if you like, with Gyokeres, with the celebration and all of that. I think there is a brand side of things with Gyokeres that adds on top of all of the other things that we've been waiting for around the centre forward. But yeah, what a moment, and shirt sales are important. Commercially, they do bring in money for Arsenal, of course, that hopefully can be used elsewhere. But Arsenal have been doing quite a lot of commercial deals. You've probably been seeing some reports around about some of the commercial agreements that have been going on this summer to bring in more money to the club as well. That I hope, of course, to help Arsenal to compete at a higher level in the future. So yeah, I'm genuinely surprised by this, but a great story and fair play to the guy. I have bought mine, so it should probably be pointing that out. I've definitely contributed to this. And the club did do free printing of Viktor Gyokeres' name on the back, I think, of the new away shirt, which is what I personally went for. So yeah, it's what a moment. I guess, and certainly something to be very excited about to see how he gets on. He could be involved, of course, tomorrow against Tottenham in the friendly in Hong Kong. Speaking of Gyokeres, though, he, of course, did train with the team on Monday. He trained with the team in Singapore before the team flew to Hong Kong yesterday. You can see him pictured there. But there was a number of interesting insights from the images that were released on the official Arsenal website yesterday that gave us a little bit of a glimpse into some of the things that have been going on, some of the changes and some of the frustrations that, of course, still exist. The frustration, of course, being no Gabriel Magalhaes, at least not spotted in the images that circulated around social media yesterday, unfortunately. He, of course, has still not been able to play in any of the pre-season games. He did play 45 minutes in the game against Watford behind closed doors, but so far, no images of Gabriel Magalhaes. I'm just doing a quick scroll down the Getty images because I only checked through the Arsenal website's release. So I'm just scrolling down through to see if there are any images of Gabriel, even just in like the background. I'll do a quick search on Gabriel now because yesterday when I went to do this, they hadn't actually been uploaded yet. But the last picture that we've got of Gabriel in training is on the 26th of July alongside Mosquera. So he wasn't involved at all. Calafiori was spotted in the images. However, he wasn't seen on the pitch. He wasn't seen doing any ball work, wasn't seen doing any training. He was spotted and pictured alongside the training kind of activity. So there was no pictures of him with his boots on. He was in his trainers, standing at the sidelines. So, yeah, no images there of him. But what we do have as quite a significant boost is pictures of Jurrien Timber doing some ball work and playing in some of the ball work drills, which is obviously a really, really big boost for Arsenal to have Jurrien Timber involved and working there. So that's a really, really important factor of the training session is not only did Calafiori watch from the sides, but Jurrien Timber is indeed involved now, which is obviously a really, really good piece of news because if Gabriel isn't fit to start the season, we've got Kivior. You could potentially play Ben White and Gabriel. Ben White and Saliba if you wanted to, but you've got Kivior as well as an option. It's why we absolutely shouldn't be selling Kivior. And we've got Christian Mosquera, of course, who also was involved in training, and he too could make his debut against Tottenham tomorrow as well. A bad news, a bit of transfer stuff now, and that Arsenal have indeed missed out on the signing of Will Wright from Salford City. Despite the fact that Arsenal agreed a deal with Salford, the player, as I actually talked about on the channel, you may remember somebody was asking a question about Will Wright and why this deal hadn't yet been confirmed, with reports that Liverpool could have come back in for the player. And I'd theorised that maybe the fact that he already being based in the Northwest wouldn't want to leave kind of his home area, if you like, and the opportunity to join Liverpool, of course, has given him that opportunity to stay in the Northwest. I think it was Deepak that said that. There you go. So we were right, to suggest that that was the case, because despite Arsenal agreeing that figure, we have now managed to miss out on the player because he would prefer to stay up in the Northwest, but each to their own, I guess. Trossard is kind of the big story of today, and it leans into a couple of other threads that we need to talk about. The main one, of course, is that according to the Times, as he reported yesterday, Trossard is increasingly likely to leave Arsenal. These are the words used in the Times article yesterday. Increasingly likely to leave Arsenal. Of course, the player is involved in contract negotiation with the club. He has so far not signed the offer that the club have put on the table. The player is open, to my knowledge, to an exit from the club this summer. He's open to staying. He's keeping his options open. I think his representatives certainly are also seeing what the lay of the land is and seeing what potential other routes and offers and options there are for Trossard. Dortmund are suggested to be a potential suitor for Leandro Trossard. And there's also said to have been some inquiries made by other Premier League clubs, be that London-based teams like potentially Fulham, for example. Whether there is interest there, it remains to be seen who the identity of these Premier League clubs are. But Arsenal would be looking for a fee in the region of £20 million and upwards. Of course, he's only got 2 years left on his current deal, less than 2 years left on his current deal. His new contract would see him become one of the higher earners at the club as well. So it wouldn't necessarily be saving money to keep him. Arsenal would be improving his wage, even improving the length of his contract. And of course, with the fact he is closing on the age of 31, that does lean itself into not particularly getting the highest of transfer fees. Think about Granit Xhaka. We got about £21.5 million for him, just over the age of 30 as well when he left the club. So it's a similar price tag for the Belgian international as well, if they were to sell him. Now, if Arsenal were to sell Leandro Trossard, of course, they would 100% need to go into the market again, because it would leave them short on the left-hand side. They would go down to having 2 out-and-out options in Martinelli and Trossard, down to just Martinelli as a potential option. And so Eberechi Eze, his name naturally comes into the conversation. Now, I'm still reliably told that Eze and the potential deal that Arsenal want to do for Eze is separate to their desires for a natural wide player if Trossard was to leave. So if Trossard was to leave, certainly it would help, I think, in pushing Arsenal to try and do a deal more, give them more motivation to do a deal for Eze. But the interesting thing here is that it still remains quite separate to the idea of bringing in a winger. Conversation I had with a friend of mine in the business yesterday kind of led to that discussion around this idea that Eze still remains very much separate to Arsenal's forays into the market, even though Eze could play in those wide areas. And so then it leads to the final question, which I know a lot of fans have been hoping, praying, and keeping their fingers crossed for, and that's obviously surrounding a deal for Rodrygo or an equivalent winger. Now, Arsenal are willing to be very patient this window regarding these deals. Another conversation I had that was quite interesting yesterday was around how Arsenal's order of priorities and how they've done deals this summer has obviously been predicated upon, to my understanding, the tick box list of positions they've needed. But they've gone and got the deals done early that proved to be the simpler deals to do. So the Kepa deal was a release clause. The Norgard deal was a cheap deal with a 1 year remaining, well, not long left on his contract, but he obviously did sign a new deal, but he was very open to leaving, and Brentford were open to selling if Norgard wanted to go, which he did. Zubimendi, of course, was a deal that Arsenal had got done really early on, and of course had already had key moments in place from January. Noni Madueke was another easy deal to do. Chelsea were willing to sell. They weren't open to selling for, really cheap, but Arsenal managed to negotiate the price down from what they initially wanted to that 48.5 plus 3.5 deal. So they got that deal done, and then they had to focus on getting the centre forward done at the behest of Mikel Arteta, who really was a big driving force in Arsenal prioritising, making sure they got that striker done before the Premier League season began, and obviously also integrating him into part of pre-season, which they wanted to do initially with Sesko, but couldn't because Leipzig at that point in the window were not budging on their ridiculous asking price for Sesko. But then they pivoted very quickly, and in less than 3 weeks, despite it feeling like a lot longer than that, managed to get the deal over the line, of course, for Gyokeres. Where Arsenal are now is that they're in a stage of the window where they're willing to kind of be patient and do deals that could be more complicated later on in the window, because these deals that are more complicated can change and can become more open as the window draws towards a conclusion, as clubs want resolutions to players' futures, players want resolutions about their futures as well. And so the deal for Eze, of course, which has a release clause, which is supposedly not running out on Thursday, like some people were talking about. It's more that release clause, I think, has an expiration date like it did last summer, midway through August instead. So you're probably looking at that still being active for just over a fortnight now, that release clause. But you've also got to bear in mind that Arsenal aren't really showing a willingness to do a deal with Palace at that release clause price. And so even if that release clause was to expire in mid-August, it doesn't necessarily harm Arsenal's chances of signing the player, because they might at this point in time be being pointed towards the release clause as something they'd have to activate to get him. But if the release clause expires, obviously it removes that option for Arsenal just to pay money and get the player. But what it could do is it could free up some room to negotiate with Palace over the player's future, especially if he pushes for a move in the latter stages of the window as well. But the Rodrygo thing, which is obviously the final part of this puzzle, or another alternative winger, is that if Arsenal were to sell Trossard alongside a number of their other players like Vieira, Reece Nelson, Zinchenko, Lokonga, Karl Hein, and some of these other players that we've been talking about that could leave, the likelihood that they would be able to go and get Rodrygo is still tricky. But obviously, if Martinelli was the player to be sold, it would make it much, much simpler. The other thing, which is I just can't see happening, but it's not beyond, Real Madrid's purview, is that if a sale cannot be organised this summer, is with Real Madrid having already done their business for the likes of Mastantuono and the progression of Arda Güler, these types of deals, if you like, it's not beyond the realms of feasibility that they decide instead to loan Rodrygo with a obligation to buy. Like, money for Real Madrid is not necessarily something they absolutely have to crave when it comes to the immediacy of deals for certain players. Players that have held value in the past, like Martin Odegaard, for example, have been loaned to clubs. Players like Luka Jovic have been loaned to clubs despite having a potential transfer value. Sergio Reguilon, of course, another player who's been loaned in the past. Of course, Dani Ceballos, as we know from Arsenal supporters, they've been open to loaning players of a starting level of quality. I think a really famous example, of course, is Achraf Hakimi, of course, I think as well, as another example before he made that move more permanent to PSG, of course. So there are examples. James Rodriguez is another good example. I'm just going down kind of the list of players that have left Real Madrid on loan in the past when he went and spent that season on loan with Bayern Munich. Money is not necessarily as craved as it is so immediately with other clubs. And while I still think, I asked the question, why would Real Madrid do that? And I think it's fair to ask the question about why would Real Madrid accept a loan move for Rodrygo? But if Arsenal were to offer Real Madrid a loan with an obligatory purchase clause of a significant figure, or an option to buy if he reaches certain parameters, it could be a deal that suits both players. Problem with that is that it would be a very, very difficult deal for Arsenal to do. And that's why it's unlikely that this is a deal that would be done until latter stages in the window. I would really struggle to see Arsenal doing a deal for Rodrygo if it was to happen until later in the window. I still think this is very, very unlikely, but it's not impossible. And there are examples, as I've run you through there, of high-profile players leaving Real Madrid on loan because they aren't a club that are in such need of selling when it comes to financial, because they do such good business, and they're able to do such good business from free deals like Trent Alexander-Arnold and Kylian Mbappe and players like this. It's interesting. So Trossard or Martinelli, either one of those two players, the only way a deal for Rodrygo has any fathomable opportunity is if a Trossard or a Martinelli leaves. I'd happily go on record, as I have before, saying I think it's impossible that Rodrygo would join Arsenal if both Trossard and Martinelli are still here. I just can't see that happening. Eze, on the other hand, I can see Arsenal signing Eze without selling Trossard and Martinelli, but I just cannot see Rodrygo happening without one of Trossard or Martinelli leaving on a permanent deal. And at the moment, according to the Times, as we reported a second ago, that is the more likely scenario, it feels, at that point. So that's kind of where we're at. And if there's one thing we've learned this summer is that Andrea Berta is capable of pulling off some quite amazing deals. So let's wait and see. All right, let's go to part two. Some of your questions about what we've discussed today, or things we haven't and that you think we should be touching upon. With plenty more to come right after this. Right, this is, of course, part 2 of today's show where we're going to be tackling some of your questions, some of your thoughts, feelings, theories, queries, and more. So if you've got some, now is the time to put them into the chat box. If you use a capital Q, it really does help them stand out. Mikel Arteta has got a press conference today, so we will be hearing from the Arsenal manager kind of early afternoon, I believe. We should be hearing from him. There's another training session. We will be getting another opportunity to see whether or not Gabriel Magalhaes or Ricardo Calafiori are involved. So we'll have some more news to discuss, of course, tomorrow morning, the day of the game. Arsenal playing Tottenham tomorrow, hoping, of course, to get a clean sweep of victories in their tour abroad this summer. Right, let's jump into the chat box, shall we? Steve says, I love the intro. Well, thank you, mate. And Gigi says, Tom, those skits are in. I sat down this morning and I was like, I don't think I've got one. I'm just going to have to run with some news and then run into the show. But then it dawned on me that Arsenal's biggest fan, Thomas Frank, can't stop saying how much he appreciates and loves Arsenal. So it was just kind of there. It was just kind of there for me. Richard says, I agree. I think Trossard is most likely to go, but he probably wants more first-team football, and he's unlikely to get that as much this season with Arsenal. James says, maybe alone here, but I would sell Trossard and Martinelli and sign Eze and Rodrygo. I don't know if you're alone in that, but I think it's very difficult to see happening. The problem with the Martinelli sale is there just isn't really that kind of option at the moment. We don't have a suitor. We don't have anybody coming in willing to offer that amount of money that would take for Arsenal to sell Martinelli. I think Arsenal would have to get upwards of £50 million easily if they were open to selling him. But there's been no real suggestion that any club is willing to pay that. The only big club, of course, in Europe that's been suggested was Bayern Munich, who have now, of course, are about to confirm the signing of Luis Diaz. So they're not going to be coming in for him. And the only other viable option has been Saudi Arabia, who I just don't think Martinelli has any interest really in going to at this point of time in his career. I think he wants to stay in Europe at a competitive club. So the idea of Martinelli leaving, I just can't quite see it happening. Lee says, Tom, while on tour, I've seen players interact with fans when leaving the stadium, as shown on AFTV, but on several occasions, Trossard puts his head down and walks through. What are your thoughts? Yeah, take it from someone, I've interviewed Leo. I have tried to interview Leo, and it's not something he particularly enjoys. That's just my honest opinion of having done interviews or tried to get interviews with Leo. It's just not in his. He's not a big fan of the camera. He's not a big fan of kind of doing interviews with the media. Some players don't mind it. Some players don't like it. Some players don't have nothing to do with it. Trossard's just not that way inclined. I don't think it's a negative thing. I don't think it's a slight on his personality. Some players like engaging more than others. Some players are more shy than others. So I don't think it's something to be critical of, to be honest. It's just he likes to keep himself to himself. And I think that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Loads of people like to do that. So I hope that gives a little bit of insight. It's not a personal thing. I don't think he's personally just not wanting to do it like through anything mean or whatever. I just think that he's just not inclined. But when he is, I have done interviews with him, and when I do speak to Leo, he's great. Like, he gives good interviews. He's really good talker, and I wish he would do more because he does give good interviews when he does them. So it's just personal preference, I think, on his part. Sean says, do you think if the Arsenal fan base buy enough of those Stanley Cups, it will fund a move for Rodrygo? Stanley Cups? I don't know why would we have to buy Stanley? Oh, the new cups. Is that what you mean? Arsenal yesterday released a new range of water distribution vessels. It seemed like that's the way they wanted to describe them because they are so expensive. A cup is £25. You can get a Stay Chill stacking tumbler for £25. You can get a Stanley 1913 Arsenal quencher for £55. Goodness gracious. I don't know who's paying 55 quid for a bottle, or 45 quid for an ice flow bottle mean, they're nice. They look nice. Don't get me wrong, and I'm sure they feel great. But £45 for a bottle. I'm sure they're like designer make or whatever. But who's paying 45 quid for a bottle? Come on, I paid a lot of money for that cap that I like wearing. But I paid a lot of money for my Arsenal shirt this summer. But shirts plural this summer. But yeah, not for me. And says Tom, so what are you actually saying? Because I'm confused. You said here multiple times you can't see us getting other Eze and Rodrygo. So is it both or just one? I said I struggle to see Arsenal getting both, Anthony. I cannot see Arsenal signing both players. I would be beyond shocked. And as I've explained, the reason why I'd be beyond shocked is because the only reason there's only two potential pathways to signing Eze and Rodrygo, right? The two potential pathways, one of them is if Martinelli is sold, because I don't think Eze is attached to Trossard and Martinelli's futures. I think Eze is attached more so to Arsenal moving on some of their other deadwood before they move for Eze, like Vieira, etc. But unless Martinelli is to be sold, I can't see us buying Rodrygo. The other pathway I can see us to go into Rodrygo is the much more complicated one and the far less likely one, as we theorise today, is if Arsenal were to agree a loan with an obligation to buy. I don't know if Real Madrid would do that, but based upon their history, they have done things like that in the past with players. But again, it still seems very unlikely. So my position has not changed and isn't going to change unless I see a significant shift in the market regarding Arsenal. It is still less than 10% for me, less than 5% for me, that Arsenal sign both Eze and Rodrygo this summer. There are just too many things I think that would need to happen that are unlikely. It would take a huge surprise in the window for that to happen. Steve says, hi, Tom. Do you think if Arteta doesn't win the league or the European Cup, that it could be the end of it? Depends on how we go from here to there. Obviously, there's a lot of football, a lot of things that happen. Like last season, if Arsenal had everybody fit and we had the season that we had last season, there would be a lot of questions, if everybody was fit. But because of where we finished, based upon the players that we had and the signings that we didn't make, frankly, it was probably his most impressive managerial season based upon what he achieved, getting to a Champions League semi-final, still finishing in second place above the likes of Man City, who had less issues than we did last season, getting to two semi-finals in the season. It was probably his most impressive coaching campaign based upon what he had available to him and what wasn't delivered to him in the window. This season, it's about winning. This season, we have strengthened. This season, if we get that one more signing in, I really don't think there can be too many complaints, if any, about the window that we've had. I know that some fans would only rate it a 7 out of 10, but maybe you're the people that need to give Arteta a bit of slack then if he's not been delivered the signings you still think that he needs to better compete for the title. I don't know. But I personally think we need that 7th signing. I think that is the thing that's going to tip us over. But we have to wait and see, don't we? It's impossible to have a view on it right now. No one can legitimately say if he doesn't do it, if he doesn't do X, Y, Z, he has to go, because we don't know what happens to get us to that point. We've got to kind of wait and see. Last season would have been a disappointing season from an accomplishment standpoint if we'd have had everybody fit and we had a successful transfer window. We didn't have either of those two things. And actually, in the end, what Arteta did was, I can't believe what he did, quite frankly. I can't believe we managed to do what we did last season based upon what was available to us. Amaral Gunner says, Tom, with our selling record, Chelsea will offer 30 million for Martinelli and will jump at it. I mean, based upon our selling record, that's never happened. So I don't think so, mate. K-Man says, which Arsenal player do you think would win the Ballon d'Or Feminin? Caldente, Russo or Kelly? Additionally, why isn't Williamson in the rankings? Good question about Williamson. Don't know. Alessia Russo. The problem with that Chloe Kelly has is that Chloe Kelly's not like a regular starter. She has huge moments and she produces these brilliant performances for Arsenal off the bench and for England. But she does start games for Arsenal as well. But mainly for England, she was a substitute that had massive impact. To win the Champions League, to win the European Cup, should give you a brilliant chance of winning the Ballon d'Or Feminin. I just think that Russo has a great chance because she starts games. She's scored in the final. She's won both those tournaments. She's a regular starter for Arsenal. The fact that Leah Williamson isn't there is a joke, quite frankly, an absolute joke, if that's true. I haven't actually seen the Les K-Man, so I'm going off your suggestions. But Alessia Russo, I think, has got a very, very good chance. Chloe Kelly, more difficult to see that because of just how regular she starts games. But amazing achievement for her to be involved in that, of course, as well. Anthony says, Tom, I was going to say that we have good relations with them in the past, Odegaard and Danny Sabas and Liao. Or Liao. Let the Liao thing go, Anthony. There's absolutely no credit in Arsenal going for Liao. There's been no real suggestion that Arsenal looking at it. It's not to say it would. It's impossible. There's nothing in the Liao stuff I've heard at all. There's just not a player that we're looking at. Lee says, Tom, wouldn't Morgan Rogers be a fantastic? He would, but I just think he'd be too expensive, Lee, to be honest. I just can't see that happening. Deepankar says, Rodrygo is certainly an upgrade to Martinelli. I don't understand why Arsenal is not pushing Real Madrid like with Liverpool and Newcastle. Because they can't right now. I have to make this very clear so people understand. They can't push for Rodrygo at the moment. There is no way to push for Rodrygo. They have two left wingers at the club. Until one of those two leaves, they're not going to push. So until a decision is made on the future of those two players, they aren't going to push. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, it's sorry, but it's not a case of being like Liverpool. Liverpool have sold Diaz. They have very sadly lost Jota. There is a reason, obviously, there to push for the signing of Isak, which, by the way, has not happened yet. They haven't pushed for Isak yet. They've shown a willingness to move for him before they signed Ekitike. Since signing Ekitike, which I'm not sure if even has been confirmed yet. I'm sure it has. I think I just probably missed it. But when it comes to the idea of signing Isak as well, there are some very reliable reports that has not happened yet. They haven't made an approach for Isak yet since the move for Ekitike. Steve says, stick to the news, Todd. What I'm doing, Steve. Amira says it's literally between Russo and Caldente right now for 1 and 2. Obviously, Caldente, best player in the WSL last season, as Arsenal also won the Champions League, but she didn't win the Euros. Does winning the Euros and Russo scoring in the final alongside Caldente and winning it push her over? Caldente has got a great chance as well. So it's between them, isn't it? It has to be between them two. Jamie says, Tom, are streamers and podcasters busier in pre-season than during the season? I saw that Expressions geezer asked Thomas Frank ridiculous questions yesterday, and it's all a bit cringy. Pre-season obviously offers more access, I think, to the kind of the YouTube side of media, access to managers and players and interviews, as you see with the access on pre-season tours. The reason for that is during a Premier League season or a Champions League season, accreditation, media accreditation, works in a different way. You have to have a specific type of accreditation to attend matches as media in the Premier League. You need on my phone, I've got a press accreditation pass that doesn't come from Arsenal. It's nothing to do with Arsenal. It's to do with the Premier League. It's to do with the Football Association. You have to have that type of accreditation to apply for access to Premier League, or in the case of UEFA competitions, UEFA Champions League games or Europa League games. So pre-season is different. Pre-season's more at the discretion of the club, I believe. I've not yet done a pre-season tour, but to my loose understanding, there's a looseness, of course, to the accreditation side for pre-season tours that comes more so through, I think, the club, which is obviously quite interesting, Jamie, because obviously for those that are long-time listeners to the channel, one of the big criticisms or trolls that I get is that people turn around and say, I say what I say because I'm scared of losing my press pass, or I'm scared of losing my pass to go to games. The irony of that, of course, is that Arsenal are to my knowledge anyway, are the ones that open up the access accreditation for potential content creators like Andrew and Arsblog, for instance, who's obviously away with the tour right now, but also AFTV, who obviously are there right now. And you see Curtis putting questions to Arteta and people asking questions to the players in the mix zones. I think I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that comes through a club side of things. So the irony that when I get told, you don't want to lose your press pass because you only say good things or positive things, or you defend Arteta or whatever. The irony of that is that my press pass doesn't come from Arsenal. Arsenal don't give me the accreditation in the same way that it works for kind of pre-season. Accreditation goes through the FA and the Premier League and the EFL and the UEFA. That accreditation goes through them more so than before it gets to the club. So you have to have those accreditations before you go through. The irony, of course, being that if Arsenal had a problem with things that had been said on certain platforms, do you think that you would see AFTV, for instance, who have had a history, let's say, with Arsenal Football Club and online? Do you think that the access would be there? So I hope that stands up as a example and a lesson to a lot of people that think that you can't be critical and get access, because we know that there are people that are very critical of Arsenal and Arteta in particular, and some of the players that are currently asking questions to Arteta and the players. I think that is fair. And I'm not saying you can't be critical. I am critical and I still go to games as press, as media. You can be. There's this weird dynamic, and it does, and I will tell you this, and I'll be very blunt about this, it does come from a very arrogant position to think that the only reason somebody is of a different mindset or of a different opinion to you, the only reason they're that way inclined is because there must be some ulterior motive or agenda or access that they're given that you can't have if you are critical. Because as you're seeing in Singapore, you can be very critical. You can say very strong opinions about the club, the manager, the players, and ask them questions in press conferences. So I really hope that this goes some way to disproving that point of view. I really, really hope that this has been an eye-opening thing for people. This is not me sitting here and saying I don't think that should happen. I'm very happy for those that are out there getting that opportunity to ask them questions, to get those press conference questions gone and to be asked. You've got to give credit to Curtis. He asked a really good question to Saliba, and we got a really good story from that. So whether I agree with a lot of what Curtis says is separate. I don't agree with a lot of what Curtis says, but respect to the guy who's asked the question to Saliba about his contract, and a story has come from that. That's what good journalism is about, is asking the right questions to get the right answers. And media is changing. Media in 2025 is very, very different. I get that some people have got their issues with it. I get that some people point out the irony of being rather, disrespectful, arguably, in some senses, and then being in a position to ask the person that you have been disrespectful about, arguably, allegedly, and then ask that person. I get why people are raising that point of view. I can see it in the chat box right now. I see it on social media. I see it a lot. I get that point of view. But for me, I'm very much thankful that this is an exercise in disproving those allegations about, access being given if you only defend the club, and that for me is something that, follows me around to other channels and whenever I appear on other channels. And I think it's a really good example that disproves that theory. So there you go. Jamie says, thanks, Tom. Appreciate the explanation. Interesting to understand how this works with media and the club. You're very welcome, mate. I'm always open to explaining things as best I can. There are some things I can't explain. Like some people say, how do you get your information about, XYZ transfer? I can't obviously explain that. I can explain it in more broad terms. You have contacts through building up networks from friends and family sometimes in some people's cases, or you might have links into a player, you might have links into an agent, you might have links into somebody who works for certain clubs, but I can't give you as much detail, in some ways it's difficult to give you that kind of explanation. But if I can ever explain how things work behind the scenes and I'm able to do that, I'm very, very, very open to being able to give you whatever I can that I'm allowed to give you within the realms of what is fair. I say allowed, it's more about just knowing what the boundaries are, really. Madhu says, seeing people hate on AFTV and expressions or United view in the interviews they've landed this preseason. I'm not really one for getting involved too much in that side of the debate. I empathize with some people that have a view that, if you've been incredibly disrespectful, and I don't watch enough of other content, to be honest, to know what is and what isn't disrespectful these days. I see some of it, of course, but I empathize with that opinion, and I understand that point of view, that people feel as though some people should not be getting access. But it's like freedom of the press is a really important thing to me, because as soon as you start saying that you can't ask questions, or you should be banned, or this way and that way, it's freedom of the press is a really important thing. And the press, for me, shouldn't just be isolated to newspapers. I don't believe in that personally, especially with how media has changed over the last 10 to 15 years. But I do empathize with the point of view that if somebody has been abusive or disrespectful, that should therefore they also be allowed that access. I think there's an interesting balance there that we have to come and find a determining line between freedom of the press and abuse and criticism. What I would be interested to know is if people that have been given access, for example, this summer, still or we see examples of abuse or disrespect. As I say, I'm not saying that's happened. I'm just going off of what I know a lot of people are suggesting online, or have seen online, or are suggesting in the chat box, for instance, that has happened. I don't know. Haven't seen it personally, but feel free to send it my way. If you've got an argument you want to put to me about it, feel free. I'm always open. My DMs are open. I'm happy to review it. But what I'm looking at is that it just sets a dangerous precedent if we start banning people or preventing people access. That I think it's a dangerous thing. I've never ever known that to happen, unless someone crosses a line in certain stories, like if there's an inaccurate story posted that's caused enough damage that a club could potentially take the decision to suspend access to a press conference. I've known that to happen, but not with Arsenal, another club. But yeah, I always find the whole freedom of the press thing a really important aspect of media, and I'm always really reluctant to say people should be banned or shouldn't be allowed to get access to things. But I know a lot of people have been talking about this online this summer after they've seen people have access to the pre-season tour. As I said before, good luck to them. Fair play for us on some of the questions. In some ways, it's like if you have said things that are really disrespectful and critical, and then you're going to get access and go there, that's going to be something that people are going to see. So, did that change things? I don't know. I don't know. Gary says, my only issue with this change is it's becoming more apparent that social media dictates a lot of the mainstream nowadays. So there is a greater responsibility to take it seriously because of the power that has. And I think, Gary, that's important to point out. I do think that, as we talk here online, I think there's a responsibility when you lead a platform, when you host a show, when you have a large listener base, that there is a responsibility that comes with that. And so I think that's really important, to know the responsibility you have, to know what's being said. And I think this isn't just, I'm not talking about like little bits of banter, which is a word I don't particularly like, but you know what I mean? People just being a bit silly. I'm talking about, really difficult topics, talk about racism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and homophobia and, all these types of derogatory, discriminatory things. That's what I'm talking about. I think that's the responsibility. So when we have a conversation about women's football, for example, and you get people saying horrible things, like I have seen after the England women won the Euros, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. That's the responsibilities I'm talking about. But also online abuse is the other thing as well, and making sure that you call it out if you see it. And if somebody does it on your platform, consequences follow as a result of that, if that makes sense. Wazza says, I can't really comment on the interviews, but can only recall someone related to the media being banned from a club. The Gary Neville Nottingham Forest thing. Yeah, so like Gary Neville, what Gary Neville said, let me get the comment exactly right. It's important that we do things accurately. Let Let's see if we can. Forest ban. So this is the report from BBC. It says Sky Sports pundit Gary Neville has said Nottingham Forest have banned him from the City Ground for their final Premier League game of the season against Chelsea on Sunday. The former Man United and England defender said he was informed by the broadcast that Forest would not give me an accreditation or access to the stadium as a co-commentator. I've had no choice but to withdraw from the coverage. BBC Sport has contacted Nottingham Forest for comment. Neville criticised Evangelos Marinakis on X after the Forest owner marched onto the pitch and spoke animatedly with manager Nuno Espirito Santo following the late goal by Leicester City in the 2-2 draw earlier this month. He posted on X, scandalous from the Forest owner. Nuno should go and negotiate his exit tonight with him. The Forest fans, players and manager do not deserve that. Forest later denied Marinakis' exchange with Nuno was a confrontation and described subsequent reaction to the situation as fake news. The club said the incident was because Marinakis' frustration that striker Taiwo Awoniyi had continued to play after an 88th minute injury, which subsequently required urgent surgery. Neville said, I've dished out my fair share of criticism and praise over the last 14 years doing this job and have never come close to this unprecedented action. Whilst they have every right to choose who they let into their own stadium, it's symptomatic of things that have happened over the last 12 months with the club. So they're taking their right to stop a person entering the stadium based upon things that he said. Because clubs do have a right to who they do and don't. I personally think that it sets kind of it's a dangerous precedent that you set when you start banning people from games, in my opinion, because of freedom of the press. I think that's freedom of the press is really, really important. There's too much manipulation of media these days, and there's too much misinformation out there, and the controlling of narratives out there for me to think that anyone being banned from attending games is, from a journalistic standpoint, for criticism and praise in equal measure, it's really difficult, and I think it's really hard to ever get on board with that idea of banning people from stadiums. It's really difficult. Treyab says, what happened to freedom of speech? And this, the whole freedom of speech thing is another thing I have real issues with, is because I think that the term and the phrase of freedom of speech has been weaponized by so many. In my opinion, freedom of speech is absolutely paramount in society, but that doesn't mean freedom from scrutiny. Freedom from scrutiny is not a thing. And so, yes, you should have freedom of speech in that sense to say and be critical in football, in media, if we bring this back to more football-specific terms. I know people are going to be listening going, keep it to football. But from footballing point of view, freedom of speech is important. But it shouldn't mean that you're free from scrutiny. If you say things that are, if you are abusive, if you are racist, if you are sexist, if you are these topics, if these derogatory, discriminatory things about an individual, you should face consequences. You've had the freedom of speech to say those things. You've had freedom of speech to say that. You can say those things. You are free to say those things. But it doesn't mean that you're free from the consequences of saying those things. Because those things should infer a response, should infer a consequence, should instigate a consequence. And that's why law exists. So, yeah, freedom of speech is not in question at all for me. It isn't. But the idea that people should be free from scrutiny, that's the problem that exists, particularly in the world of football that we're talking about here. People are free to send horrible messages to Kai Havertz's other half. But the fact that those people should be free from any consequence of doing that is wrong. And thankfully, of course, there was action taken against somebody that did send Kai Havertz's partner some pretty horrible abuse. And this is what I'm talking about. You're free to do anything, but you're not free to expect no consequence from those words or actions. And that's society. Alex says freedom of speech, freedom of the press needs to be protected. At the same time, the press got to maintain a balanced narrative, not necessarily the personal opinion of the individual. Again, that's also an interesting question, Alex, and that depends, because if you're writing an opinion pieces are important as well, and opinions in media are also important. But there is also aspects of certain areas of the media that should remain unbiased. That certain reporting should be unbiased, but then it is important to accept that there are topics that should have strong opinions associated with them. So it's a fine balance, isn't it? It's a balance between maintaining balance in certain aspects of media, but accepting that opinions and personal opinions of individuals on topics is also important to discuss. Reporting of a topic unbiased, but discussion around that topic should be encouraged. That's where personal opinion should come in as well. We're going to go into Cheese says such a deep episode today. So I know and I love these topics. I love having discussions about these. I really enjoy these conversations. That's why I do this. It's why I enjoy having these kind of, why I do this job. Why I'm involved in media. I really enjoy having the foresight to have these conversations. There are some topics that I have to sometimes hold my hands up and say, I don't know enough about this to have a really strong opinion attached to it. And some people will criticize me for that. Will say, you've talked about this, but why won't you talk about this? And the honest answer is that I personally don't feel comfortable because I don't think I'm educated enough and I don't have access to enough of the facts to have that specific conversation. And if you want to call me a coward, feel free. But until I feel confident enough to have a strong opinion on something by being educated enough on something, I feel I have the right to reserve attaching myself to that conversation personally. That's just my personal view on it. And I think anyone should have that right as well. Oslo Gooner says, good to see other fans like you here as well. And it proves the point that TGT community is a great place. Thank you, Oslo. That's very kind of you to say. Let's see. We've got 10 minutes or so left. Can we bring the conversation back round to football? I guess we'll wait and see. Ty says, on another note, can Gyokeres get the freedom of a penalty box and will we supply him with the ammunition? This is obviously the big question about how Gyokeres is going to adapt to Arsenal. Is he going to adapt to Arsenal? Are we going to adapt to Gyokeres? I think that it's a bit of both. I think it's a balance, a balance that we've been discussing in that last topic. I think there's a balance that needs to be found between the two. I think Arsenal need to change the way they attack in some ways to benefit Gyokeres, but I think in some ways he is going to have to adapt to playing in a more possession-based style and having less transition moments in which he is so dangerous. So I think it's a bit of both. That's where I'd stand on that. Let's go to Philip says, morning, Tom. How far along is the project of increasing the Emirates capacity? I have no idea, mate. I know it's very quiet, but the club are very quiet. All I know is that they are looking at expanding. They are exploring the options, but so far, nothing, as my aware, nothing to my knowledge has progressed. There's a lot of logistical, legal, societal, commercial, like kind of different things going on there. Let's go to Comrie says, is anyone interested in Vieira, Lokonga, Zinchenko? We really need to offload some of those players. Vieira, there's been rumours of Como and West Ham more recently, although I don't see where West Ham are getting any money from. Look, I know Kudus is obviously gone, but I think they're spending it in other areas. Lokonga, I've not heard anything. Zinchenko, Dortmund were previously. I think a couple of Premier League clubs have been mentioned, but I don't know how real that is now. Karl Hein, I imagine probably will get sold at some point, but he does have a thumb injury at the moment. I don't know how serious that is. Yeah, it's not looking like, and obviously Reece Nelson is in talks over a move to Fulham at the moment. So let's wait and see. N16 says, if subscribers are rude to Tom, I'm sure he will. I mean, yeah, I reserve my right to not be abused in the chat. And that's what I mean. You're free to say whatever you like to me, but you're not free from the scrutiny if you're being abusive or trolling. We have a hard rule on trolling in the chat. That there's consequences to that. You're free to put it in there. No one's stopping you from doing that. But there are consequences to being abusive in the chat box. It's as simple as that. That's what I mean. People get confused between the phrase freedom of speech and freedom from scrutiny. They are intertwined, but they are two very, very different things. People think that you don't have freedom of speech because you'll get blocked if you're abusive in the chat. You're free to say whatever you want. But you're not free from the consequences that will come by saying whatever you want if they are abusive, if they are trolling. That's just what we have, Thomas says harassment is not protected speech. Exactly. It's not protected in the same way. You're free to do it. You're free. You have free will. It's part of being human. But society is how it gives us the consequences to live more safely. That's what's key. 5 minutes left, Keith. I know. I'm sorry. I'll keep it to football. Tube Doot says, why does Arteta always lie? He's a big liar face. Says Tube. You can call it lying if you like. It's always kind of one of those words, isn't it? Lie is such a harsh, brash, accusatory word, the word lie. I was talking to my missus about this last night. We were talking about what the difference between a lie and a fib. A fib is a lie, but fibs are like little harmless things, Have you done the washing yet? Yes. You haven't, but you're going to do it before they get home. So it's not done yet, but it saves yourself an argument saying you've done it knowing you're going to do it before they get home. That's a fib, right? A lie is, have you cheated on me? No. When you have. I haven't. But that, I think there's a difference between a fib and a lie. I think Arteta is a serial fibber. That's what I think Arteta is. I think Arteta has little fibs here and there because he has to in some ways. Sometimes you have to, if you're asked a question and you can't say something like, about a transfer situation. I think there are little fibs that are said about injuries. Like before a big game, he might say a player is available or isn't available as a little fib to try and put off or to try and mislead what the opposition think. There are differences, I think, between the two. So is he a liar? It depends how you define it, I guess, doesn't it? I think he's a serial fibber. That's where I think. But I think they're done in it's not a malicious thing. It's a tactical, strategic thing in the world of football, and that's where I'm kind of at. Jason says, how come you have come in fancy dress today? I know, I just can't help myself, Jason. I just can't help myself at all. Carl says, Tom, what have you done? I know. I've started off quite the conversation today. It's been quite good, though. Deepak says, will you be attending the friendly match at the Emirates? I should be in attendance for the Villarreal game, but I am not in attendance for the Athletic Club game because it's my wife's 30th birthday that weekend. So I am not in attendance for that one, but I should be there for the Villarreal game, hopefully. Let's go to the Lizard King says, Arteta is not a liar. What an idiotic thing to say. I disagree with you. I don't think it's an idiotic thing to say because it's subjective. It depends upon how people define what lying is. Has Arteta lied about things in press conferences like player fitness or whether a player has trained or whether we're signing somebody? Of course. But as I say, I think they're like little fibs. They're like strategic, tactical fibs that benefit the club in a strategic or tactical way. So I don't think it's idiotic. I think if you're criticizing him for lying, if you're saying that he should tell the media, and speaking as a member of the media, it's my job to try and get information from Arteta about fitness of players and where we're at with certain things. That's my job. But I empathize with his position that if he gives information away or if he gives a certain truth about something, it could put Arsenal at a disadvantage. It could disadvantage us. So I'm always straddling the line between journalism and fandom. Like I love covering Arsenal, but when I cover Arsenal in my job, when I'm in a press conference or I'm at a game writing, I'm not a fan in those moments. I have to disassociate the two things. If you don't disassociate, and it's hard, I've made mistakes in press. I've said the word "we" before, and it happens. When you're a fan of the club, those little Freudian slips can happen. But you have to disassociate when asking those questions, because I'm asking the questions from a journalistic point of view, inferred by my knowledge of Arsenal. But when I'm writing, if I have to be critical, I'll be critical. If I have to be praising, I'll be praising. If I have to try and find out about a player, I'll find out about a player. That's just the way it works, because you have to separate the two. Oslo says, are you going to serve the chocolate cake that you love so much at the next live event? Hey, look, if I could get hold of one of them whole for a live event, I would. But unfortunately, I don't think I can do that. But thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed today's episodes. Another long one. We've gone into some interesting topics. We went a bit off track, a little bit off on a tangent, as we do. We like doing that. And I hope that you've got some opinions on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. I hope I've portrayed how I feel as best I can. I think I have. I think I have. But you always watch these things back and go, oh, I don't know about that. So, but I think I've portrayed it in as best and as most accurately as possible. Again, to stress, it's not a personal thing, about the whole who gets access and who doesn't. I think it's important. Freedom of the press, I think, is really important. So that's just where I sit on it. Anyway, thank you so much to those for tuning in. Do drop a like on the video. Do subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 a.m. to discuss Arteta's press conference, what we saw from the training session, and any transfer news that drops today. Of course, it being a match day tomorrow. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.